Hello, I'm Dr. Torna Pitman, and I work for Gender Equality, which is a Tasmanian statewide family violence service. This is the third video in the series of thoughtcasts that we're producing on coercive control. And today I'll finish off the dynamics of coercive control so that I can then move on to the different tactics that are used in the next video. So stay tuned and I'll be back very shortly with more information on how the dynamics actually work. I want to take you through a PowerPoint today to finish off the dynamics of coercive control. And it's going to be focusing on how the dynamics play out in every aspect of an intimate relationship. But I will first of all be starting by revisiting the first two episodes briefly, and then more on the attitudinal styles. I'll be going into our human rights in a relationship and the different kinds of violations of your human rights and boundaries that occur in coercive control. So, first of all, revisiting the first two episodes. In week one, what we covered was that the research describing the treatment of whistleblowers, prisoners of war, cult members, the treatment of one group of people by another group of people, such as racism and heterosexism and colonized peoples, depicts the same mechanics of oppression, which are the dynamics, as used by a coercive controller in an intimate relationship. It's really important to remember that coercive control is a patterned misuse and abuse of power in an intimate relationship. It's also really important to remember that coercive control is a pattern. And I have a lot of people saying to me, I'm not sure whether I'm a coercive controller or not, because we all behave badly sometimes in relationship. And we do things that prevent the growth and evolution of a relationship because by virtue of being a human being. But coercive control is more a patterned misuse and abuse of power, so that the outcome in each area of the relationship is very negative for the person subjected to coercive control. The other point about that is that if someone behaves badly occasionally in a relationship or doesn't behave to the standards that they would like, then it is more easily resolvable, it's more acknowledged, it's apologized for, and the behavior is changed, and the connection and the equality of the relationship remains stable. The coercive controller shapes and molds you to fit their requirements and gradually takes you away from your own rights, your own boundaries, and your own needs. Think about that spider wrapping up the prey in the web. That's what a coercive controller does to you. It just wraps you up more and more and more in the dynamics that they create, so that you no longer have access to what you want or think or feel or need in the relationship. You can become hostage to the coercive controller and to a pattern of catering and submitting to them before you fully understand what is really happening to you. It starts insidiously and slowly. It's not obvious necessarily at the beginning. There may be some red flags, but many of those red flags are very easily overlooked if there are actually any red flags at all to start off with. I'm going to now go just a little bit further into the attitudinal styles. So who builds the web that I keep talking about? Who builds this web of dynamics? And that is the attitudinal style of the coercive controller. That's what's at the very core there of the web. The attitudinal style of the coercive controller builds and weaves the web of dynamics around you. Usually outside of your awareness, outside of your consciousness, and against your will and at your expense. Is this attitudinal style always obvious, though? I often get asked. Sometimes some people who seem to be coercive controllers can occasionally act as if they really are the victim, and they're very hard done by, and they've got a lot of self-pity and feelings of poor me, this is really hard. And it looks like they don't feel that they're superior at all, or entitled, or adversarial. Quite the contradictory, really. However, it does depend on the style of the coercive controller. It is not always visible, the attitudinal style. It can come and go, but inevitably, though, it is playing out in the background in the following ways. The superior attitudinal style of I govern you will lead to an overall lack of concern with equality or of empathy for their partners. An entitled attitudinal style, you serve me, will lead to expectations of one-way benefit and privileges. It's that part of the attitudinal style that sets up the double standards, that puts you in double binds, that are maybe quite subtle and sometimes really overt and extremely dangerous. An adversarial attitudinal style, I will always win and be right, leads to a fault-finding, competitive behavioural style that engages in coercive control, will control the conversation and put you in a position of feeling fear, obligation, guilt, or shame, or blame, rather than connecting and discussing and being able to resolve anything. So those three strands of the attitudinal style bind together, and they create the core of the web of dynamics. Now, on being defamed, your responses to the loss of power in the relationship and the patterned violation of your human rights and boundaries will be used against you as evidence that you are inferior. So when you're in relationship with a coercive controller, you are often made to feel quite inferior, as if there's something wrong with you, particularly when you are finding any difficulties in the relationship, and you can end up being defamed for the depression, anxiety, confusion, loss of self-esteem, the trauma, and any emotional reactivity that is just the natural consequence of being coercively controlled. So in many ways, that's part of the double bind. I will hurt you, and then I will blame you for being hurt. So being defamed is a really big part of the web of dynamics, and it comes about from the attitudinal style of superiority, entitlement, and being very adversarial. I'm going to move on now to exploring our human rights in a relationship. Coercive control is really a human rights issue. It is a relentless violation of your human rights and a relentless violation of your boundaries. And they can be from covert to overt, from subtle to obvious, from not very important to extremely important, to not dangerous to very dangerous. But there will be a whole continuum of these violations of your human rights and your boundaries, and it will depend upon the style of the coercive controller, what type you are inevitably subjected to. So if you have a look at this slide, and you look at the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and 8, and then there's the crime. So really overt boundary violations can be called a crime and can be a chargeable offence. Whereas the levels 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are violations of your rights and your boundaries, but they don't necessarily enter into the legal language or the legal understanding of the dynamics of coercive control. They're more subtle. They underpin every crime. They underpin every chargeable offence, and there's different gradations of abuse. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UDHR, was issued by the United Nations in 1948 to clarify our fundamental human rights and the dignity and worth of the human person. There are 30 articles, and of particular relevance to family violence and coercive control, in fact, to any relationship, are all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. No one shall be subject to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Now, all of those things are what happens in coercive control. You do not have freedom, you do not have equality or dignity or rights. You do not have your life, your liberty or security. You are subjected to, if not torture physically, it could be mental torture, to cruelty, to inhuman or degrading treatment, or punishment and retaliation. I'm going to show you a video clip from the United Nations about our human rights. Take a listen.
Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? After World War II, it was clear that the horrors of the war should never be allowed to occur again. Founded in 1945, the United Nations sought to prevent future atrocities by affirming, in its foundational charter, faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of the human person, and a commitment to promote better standards of life in larger freedom. In the years that followed, member states of the United Nations strived to develop the human rights provisions of the Charter and capture them in a single document. It took 3 years to agree on a common vision. On the 10th of December, 1948, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations.
Still, it is the first step in a great evolutionary process. It is the first occasion on which the organized community of nations has made a declaration of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and it has the authority of the body of opinion of the United Nations as a whole. And millions of people, men and women and children all over the world, will turn for hope and guidance and inspiration to this document.
While history alone can determine the historic significance of an event, it is safe to say that the declaration before us may be destined to occupy an honorable place in the procession of positive landmarks in human history.
The Declaration consists of a preamble and 30 articles, with Article 1 powerfully proclaiming that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. No discrimination, right to life, liberty and security, no slavery, no torture or cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, equal protection of the law, no arbitrary arrest, detention or exile, fair and public hearing, no arbitrary interference with privacy, right to freedom of movement, right to seek and enjoy asylum, right to a nationality, right to marry and to found a family, right to property, freedom of thought, conscience and religion, freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, right to take part in government, right to work, right to rest and leisure, right to food, clothing, housing, medical care and social services, right to education, right to participate in cultural life.
These human rights are not country-specific. They are not a reward for good behavior or particular to a certain era or social group. They are the rights of people of every color, from every race and ethnic group, whether or not they have disabilities, citizens or migrants, no matter their sex, their class, their caste, their creed, their age, or sexual orientation.
So if we transpose these rights that have just been talked about by the United Nations into a relationship, then we can see that we have many rights in a relationship that coercive control actually completely either ignores or obstructs or overpowers. So if we start at the beginning of this web of dynamics again, and the superior entitled adversarial attitudinal style, and it bleeds out into the entire relationship, and all the boundaries are permeable. It bleeds out through every part. And then if we think about how those dynamics play out in every part of the relationship, and they do not allow your rights in every part of the relationship. So in the conversational patterns, you have the right to equal voice, to have your opinion heard and responded to be given the same respect and consideration as that of your partner, and that they will do their very best to resolve the difficulties and differences in your relationship. That is your right. The dynamics play out in the social arrangements so that all your rights are violated in some way, shape, or form. You have the right in your social arrangements to respect for your freedom of movement, friendships, activities, and hobbies outside of your relationship, the use of all social resources, and to develop social capital. You also have the right in your financial arrangements to share equally with your partner in all financial decisions and in your financial security, independence, and honesty. In the sexual relationship, you have the right to sexual respect, safety, and consent, as well as sexual honesty, intimacy, care, and reciprocity from your partner. But the dynamics will play out in a way in the sexual relationship so that those rights are violated in some way, shape, or form. How you are talked about to others, you also have rights here. You have the right to be spoken about by your partner accurately and fairly to others, and in a way that does not violate your privacy or integrity and the privacy and integrity of the relationship. You have the right to social validation and support. And when you're defamed to others, they turn away from you and you lose that social validation and support. In the physical relationship, you also have rights, but the dynamics will play out in a way that these rights are violated. You have the right to be physically safe and autonomous, as well as to share equally with your partner in all decisions and responsibilities related to the relationship, children, household, medical, dietary, and lifestyle needs, as well as equally deciding how to share this load. So when you have a look at the dynamics and how they bleed out into every part of the relationship, you can see that those dynamics violate your rights and your boundaries. So now I'm going to go into the different kinds of violations of these human rights that we have in our relationships and boundaries. There are different ways in which your rights and boundaries can be violated. And as far as I know, there's about 3, but there could be lots more. But 3 is enough to get started with. The first ones are neglecting, disregarding, withholding, and indifference, avoiding or ignoring your rights and boundaries. These are very, very hurtful boundary violations. And here's an example. They didn't care how I felt about sex, and if I tried to talk, they'd turn the music up on me. So that's an example of very, very common boundary violations when living with a coercive controller, and they're not so well known. There are those boundary and right violations which obstruct you or thwart or block you from your rights and boundaries. For example, my partner would interrupt my sleep or my plans, or put things in place so I couldn't get my driver's license. And lastly, encroaching, overpowering, and forcing their way past your rights and over your boundaries. He would stand over me, yell and point at me, stab at me with his fingers. He threatened to throw me down a mine shaft. So in many ways, it looks like there's increasing severity of those boundary violations or those rights violations, that they get worse. But what clients say to us, and what my research participants have said to me, and what comes out in all the research around the world on coercive control, is that all the different types of boundary violations are hugely impactful on us. And they can be just as impactful if they're neglecting our rights and needs, if someone is indifferent to our rights and needs and boundaries, than if they are actually overpowering us and forcing their way with us. So here's some examples of disregarding, ignoring, or avoiding your rights and boundaries. So conversational patterns. I am taken no notice of when I want to voice an opinion. He might quietly walk out or just turn the music up. How you were talked about to others. He would do a hangdog act with others as if I was causing him great distress. He never actually told them what he was doing to me. Social arrangements. We would go out, they would treat me as if I wasn't there and would never sit with me, and he'd just ignore me. Economic relationship. I was always picking up the pieces because they avoided their financial responsibility to the family. Physical relationship. I could never get him to feed the children properly. He would drink before he had to drive the children. Sexual relationship. I wasn't even noticed during sex. It was robotic. There was no warmth or affection. Avoiding responsibility for the health, safety, and well-being of you and the children, and preventing appropriate engaging, negotiating, listening, provision of information, explanations, or reassurance play a crucial but lesser known role in the dynamics of coercive control. I want to show you some examples of obstructing, thwarting, or blocking your human rights and boundaries. So there's the different parts of the relationship. And remember, there's more to the relationship than these parts. You can break a relationship down into as many parts as you like and include things such as religious and spiritual practices, technology, social media, roles and responsibilities, but I use these 6 for simplicity. So our conversations are about point scoring and deflecting blame onto me rather than listening or compromising. I was blocked from doing my course that I loved by their sudden and urgent need for the car at that time. I couldn't get to the truth about our finances. I'd get redirected to my financial lack of know-how. If he knew I had something, he wouldn't. If he knew I liked something, he wouldn't do it. If he knew I didn't like something, he'd do that. It was impossible to have any sexual intimacy. I could not get my partner to attend to or pay for fixing important things like the car or the lawnmower. There was always some reason why he couldn't or wouldn't. The children asked why we separated, and he said, "Oh, your mother knows. She knows what she has done." Behaviours that obstruct, block, or thwart you play a lesser known but crucial role in the dynamics of coercive control. And then we have some examples of encroaching, overpowering, or forcing their way past your human rights and boundaries. In the conversational patterns, an example might be, I get accusations, threats, name calling, the tone of voice, facial expressions, gestures, and behaviours are frightening. In the social arrangements, an example might be, I am put down publicly and he laughs if I'm complimented. I am wound up with remarks that are hurtful and hostile, yet they have to come with me if I want to go out. In the physical relationship, my children witnessed him strangling me. He threatened to kill all of us. He always took me on when I was either asleep or busy doing something else. He would punch holes in the wall if he was annoyed. Economic relationship, they always had control of the money. I wasn't allowed. They would walk me to the bank, make me get my pension out, and then take my pension. Sexual relationship. My ex was coercive and grumpy around sex. If he didn't get it, I was called names like frigid bitch and frigid mole. I felt really sexually insulted. How you were talked about to others. My friends and neighbours all thought he was wonderful. He would tell me I looked unfriendly and that I was the problem. But all along, he was running me down to others in the community. Behaviours that encroach, overpower, or force their way past your rights and boundaries play a more obvious role in the dynamics of coercive control, but not necessarily any more impactful. What our clients and my research participants have said to me is that the lesser known boundary and rights violations, the ones that are more disregarding or obstructing, they really take their toll on somebody, and they are relentless. They are fast and furious in the relationship, and they happen all, more or less all day, every day on a subtle level. If there is a web of dynamics, then there is a web of abuse. So let's have a look at this web yet again. The web of dynamics creates a web of abuse. In the conversational patterns, the neglecting, obstructing, or overwhelming of your communication rights and boundaries is going to end up in verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and with overall the person being silenced. In the social arrangements, the neglecting, obstructing, or overwhelming of your social rights and boundaries is going to end up in social abuse and overall the person being isolated. The financial arrangements, there'll be neglecting, obstructing, or overpowering of your financial rights and boundaries. The person will end up with financial abuse and being overall exploited. In the sexual relationship, neglecting, obstructing, or overpowering of your sexual rights and boundaries, there will be sexual abuse, and overall that person will be subjugated. And how you are talked about to others, the same thing, all the different styles of boundary violations, which will end up with you being defamed, which I call defamation abuse, and overall you will be alienated as people turn away from you because of what they're told about you. The physical relationship, there'll be neglecting, obstructing, or overpowering of your physical rights and boundaries. You'll end up with physical abuse and being threatened, having all your rights threatened. So that is a substantial web of abuse. And remember, whatever happens in one part of the web, whatever happens in your conversational patterns affects the entire relationship. It affects your social arrangements, the financial arrangements, etc. Whatever happens in your financial arrangements affects the entire relationship. Whatever happens in any part of the relationship affects every other part of the relationship. It will bleed through into every part of the relationship. So to sum up this PowerPoint, there are 4 things I'd really like you to know about the violations of your human rights and your boundaries. Number 1, there are different types of violations and levels of abuse, and because of the attitudinal style, they will occur in each area of a relationship. Only some are chargeable, and there are different gradations. All of the violations interrelate. For example, whatever violations occur in one part of the relationship will affect the entire relationship, as all parts of the web are interconnected. In the course of a single day, you may experience many violations of your rights and boundaries, yet be completely unaware of them. You won't feel great. You won't understand what's going on, but what will be happening, there will be subtle violations of your rights and boundaries, or there'll be the sorts of violations that you are unaware of, don't understand, or they're too fast for you to actually process, and there's too many of them for you to be able to keep up with them. Violations can move from disregarding to obstructing or overwhelming you in a split second. One interaction can have all three types of boundary violations. So the web of abuse is made up of all different kinds of rights and boundary violations, many of them below your consciousness or outside of your awareness, or just outside of your understanding of what's acceptable and what isn't. But when you really sit down and look at every part of your relationship or your client's relationship and work out what's happening in every part of the relationship, you start to see how the dynamics play out and create a problem in every part of the relationship. Depending upon the style of the coercive controller, there may be more of a focus on some parts of the relationship than others. For example, some coercive controllers are not as interested in socially isolating their partner as others, and some coercive controllers are not as interested in controlling the money as other coercive controllers, but all those different styles are going to be explained to you in a later video. I'd like to thank you for watching and listening to this PowerPoint. I hope that you've managed to get something out of it, and it's always hard to enjoy a video on coercive control, but once you had those dynamics nailed, then you know that you will be able to see if they're being played out on somebody, and even if it's a different style from one you're used to, you will still be able to detect the dynamics. And when we all know these dynamics, we're able to detect them, then we're able to either help someone with them or get help for ourselves, and we can explain it to somebody as well as the coercive controller what is actually happening and how the relationship is not equal and it's not safe and it's unacceptable. I would like to welcome you to like or share this video, and if you'd like to get in touch with us, the details are coming up. Thanks a lot for listening. I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye for now.